Chai, look at that.
My head is spinning. I can't hold myself. Oh yeah,
Fall I go.
Your beauty is stunning. Absolutely breathtaking.
I know, darling. I know.
Of course you do.
Fine girl, you too beautiful. Your beauty ain't a die. Chai, see fine woman.
Wow, you look beautiful.
Fine girl, study.
You are so beautiful, my dear.
Nobody knew exactly when Lunara arrived at Ajeromi Heights, but everyone had a story about it. Some neighbors insisted it was on a quiet Tuesday afternoon when the sun was hot and lazy. Others swore she appeared on a Sunday evening right when the electricity went out. At that moment when people shouted, "Ah, NEPA has taken light," and the whole compound went dark for a few seconds. Whichever tale was true, one thing was certain. From the day Lunara moved into the compound, the men of Ajeromi Heights completely forgot their senses. Ajeromi Heights was not an actual high-rise building, but a friendly compound with a few small houses painted in bright colors. There was a sky blue house on one side, a light green house on the other, and a yellow one at the back. These weren't huts or fancy apartments, just simple one-room self-contained flats arranged around a wide yard. In the yard, children would play football in the evenings, and women would sit outside braiding hair or gossiping about everything from the price of tomatoes to whose goat had wandered off. It was a lively, colorful place where everyone knew everyone's business. So, when a beautiful stranger like Lunara arrived, it became the hottest topic in the entire neighborhood. Lunara rented a small self-contained room at the back of the compound, in the yellow-painted house behind the others. She moved in quietly, greeting everyone with a polite smile and a soft, calm voice. The women noticed that she was always neatly dressed. Her clothes were simple, but somehow she made them look elegant. She was slender with smooth, dark skin and bright eyes that seemed to glow softly whenever she smiled. And her smile, oh, that smile was gentle and mysterious at the same time. On her first day, Lunara went around to greet her new neighbors as is polite. She knocked on doors or waved at people sitting outside. "Good afternoon, ma," she greeted one of the elderly women with a small bow. "Good evening, sir," she said kindly to one of the men returning from work. Her voice was so clear and sweet that it made people pause just to listen to her speak. Even when she said nothing, her presence was powerful. As she passed by, conversations would stop in the middle, and everyone's eyes would follow her as if pulled by a magnet. The effect on the men was immediate and almost ridiculous. In Ajeromi Heights lived men of all types, young and old, married and single, quiet and boastful. But within 24 hours of Lunara's arrival, these men were acting like bewitched schoolboys. The first victim of Lunara's charm was a man named Kunle Dairo. Kunle was a middle-aged man with a big round stomach and a voice that could boom across 3 compounds. He had been married to his wife Bisi for 15 years and was known for bragging about how no woman can control me. He often said this while patting his large belly as if he was the king of the home. That afternoon, Kunle came home from work in his usual loud manner, honking his car horn at the gate. He stepped out wearing his tie loosely around his neck and calling out, "Where is everyone? I'm hungry, oh!" But then he saw Lunara carrying a bucket of water from the tap. She looked so graceful even in that ordinary moment. Kunle froze. For a man who was always noisy, he suddenly went completely quiet. He realized he was staring and quickly greeted her. "Good afternoon. My name is Kunle." Lunara gave a small smile and replied, "Good afternoon, sir," before walking on to her room at the back. Kunle stood there for a good minute, forgetting that he was hungry, forgetting that he was even standing in the middle of the yard. His wife Bisi had to tap him on the shoulder. "Kunle, what are you looking at? Close your mouth, mosquitoes will enter," she scolded, hands on her hips. Kunle shook himself and pretended nothing happened. He hurried inside his house and the compound returned to its usual buzz. Or so it seemed. However, a few minutes later, an unbelievable thing happened that will be talked about for weeks. Kunle opened the door of his fridge to grab a cold drink. Next thing, he marched straight to the deep freezer in the corner of his living room. Yes, the freezer where they keep frozen meat and fish, and carefully placed his car keys inside,
right on top of a bag of frozen okra. Bisi watched him with eyes wide open. Then Kunle closed the freezer door, picked up the TV remote, and tried to change the TV channel with his car remote key. He kept pressing the car key, wondering why the TV wasn't changing from the news to the football match. His wife burst out laughing. "Kunle, have you gone mad? Why are you pointing the car key at the TV?" she asked. Kunle looked at the key in his hand, completely confused. In his mind, he was sure he'd picked up the TV remote. "Where is the TV remote then?" he muttered. After a short search, Bisi decided to check the freezer. She had a strange hunch, and there, sitting cold and lonely among the frozen fish, were Kunle's car keys. Bisi couldn't believe it. "Kunle Dairo, you put your car keys in the freezer. What is wrong with you?" she exclaimed, half amused and half angry. Kunle was so embarrassed he scratched his head and said, "I don't know how that happened. I think I'm just tired." But Bisi wasn't convinced. She had seen how he was staring at the new lady outside. She simply shook her head. "Better go and rest then. Maybe the sun has fried your brain," she said, giving him a side eye. It didn't stop there. In the days that followed, other men in the compound started acting very strangely whenever Lunara was around. Men who usually rushed home after work to avoid Lagos traffic began hanging around outside for no reason, just hoping to catch a glimpse of Lunara if she stepped out. If Lunara as much as smiled at a man or said hello, that fellow would walk away like he was floating on clouds and then promptly forget what he was supposed to do. One evening, Mr. Okoro, a usually responsible father, had one job to pick up his 6-year-old daughter from school and also buy some groceries on the way back. That same evening, Lunara happened to walk by the front gate just as Mr. Okoro was driving out. She waved politely. He nearly drove into a gutter because he was busy staring at her in the rearview mirror. Fortunately, he hit the brakes in time. Lunara continued on her way, not knowing the chaos she'd caused. Mr. Okoro, feeling foolish, continued driving to the market. But in the marketplace, as he was about to pay for tomatoes, he suddenly realized he could not remember what his wife sent him to buy. The list was long forgotten. He scratched his head and ended up buying only a bottle of soda and groundnut for himself. Worse still, he completely forgot to stop at his daughter's school. He drove all the way home humming a tune, only to meet his angry wife on the phone with the school teacher, arranging a late pickup for their forgotten child. When Mrs. Okoro asked him what happened, Mr. Okoro just stuttered, I don't know, it just slipped my mind." Another neighbor, Ade, actually forgot his own wife at church on Sunday. They had driven to church together that morning. After service, Ade stepped outside to move the car from a tight parking spot. Just at that moment, Lunara passed by the church gate because the church was on the same street as the compound. She wasn't even attending the church. She was probably on her way to buy something. But Ade saw her from a distance and his mind went blank. He drove the car straight home in a trance-like state, parked, went inside his house and began watching TV. An hour later, his wife came home in a taxi, furious and red-faced. She had waited and searched for her husband, only to realize he had driven off without her. "Ade, have you lost your mind?" she shouted. Ade stood up, shocked, realizing only then that he had left his wife behind. He apologized over and over, swearing that he thought she was in the car. His embarrassed excuses earned him a thorough scolding and a week of sleeping on the living room couch. As days passed, the wives of Ajeromi Heights grew increasingly suspicious of Lunara, while the husbands acted like besotted teenagers. The women would whisper among themselves whenever Lunara walked by, eyeing her up and down. There was Mama Sade, an elderly widow who had lived there the longest, frowning thoughtfully whenever she saw Lunara. There was young Amaka, newly married, who held her husband's hand tightly whenever Lunara greeted them, as if to mark her territory. And of course, Bisi, Kunle's wife, who never let Kunle out of her sight now, afraid he might go and do something even more foolish.
The gossip around the compound was non-stop. In the evenings when the air was cooler, women gathered under the big mango tree near the Blue House. They sat on wooden benches or plastic chairs, wrappers tied around their chests and babies on their laps, and they talked about Lunara. The funny thing was, nobody really knew anything about this lady beyond her name and that she paid her rent on time. Lunara was polite but very private. She didn't join in the gossip or spend much time chatting. She would greet everyone and go back inside. She went out occasionally, always alone. She did not seem to have visitors and she came back before it got too late. In fact, Lunara gave no reason at all to cause trouble except that her beauty and calmness were strangely unsettling. One of the younger women, Titi, leaned in and whispered one evening, "Have you noticed her eyes? That Lunara's eyes are too calm, like she's always deep in thought. It's not normal." Another woman, Auntie Ngozi, nodded vigorously. "Yes, and she greets you so politely, always bending a little, saying good morning, good afternoon. She greets like someone counting souls." The others shivered or laughed at that expression. They all knew what Ngozi meant. Lunara's polite greeting somehow felt eerie, as if she could see right through a person. The men, on the other hand, dismissed all these concerns with a wave and a laugh. Is it a crime for a woman to be beautiful again?" one of the husbands said when the women confronted them about their changing behavior. "You people are just jealous," another man added with a chuckle. "So because a fine girl is living near us, we should all stop looking? We are only admiring, or nothing else." The women were not amused by these comments. "We know you men," Mama Sade warned, wagging her finger. "Today you are admiring, tomorrow you are forgetting your family." The men just kept laughing. To them, their wives were overreacting. After all, what had Lunara done really? She only smiled and greeted them. Was it her fault that they found her stunning? They claimed the women were just being paranoid and jealous for nothing. And so for a time, laughter and teasing filled at Jeremy Heights. The men joked about one another, sharing the silly things they had done as if it was all a big game. Kunle's freezer incident became a legendary joke. Whenever he started bragging, one of his friends would ask, "Oga, have you checked the freezer for your car keys lately?" And everyone would roar with laughter. Ade's church mishap was another source of amusement, though Ade himself was still sleeping on the couch, which his friends found hilarious. Mr. Okoro's forgotten daughter's story was told and retold, with Mr. Okoro reddening with shame. Even the women, though annoyed, sometimes found humor in the situation. "Imagine, my own husband forgot I was not in the car. Am I invisible?" Ade's wife joked one afternoon while talking to Bisi. Bisi sighed. "At least yours remembered eventually. Mine put car key in the freezer and didn't even realize." They both shook their heads at the foolishness. Despite all the joking and teasing, a strange undercurrent hung in the air that nobody noticed at first. Each time Lunara passed by with that gentle smile, the laughter would die down a bit quicker than before. The men would stand a little straighter, trying to look impressive yet looking silly, and the women's eyes would narrow in caution. Something was different about this lady, but it was too early to say what. Nobody was afraid yet. For now, Lunara was just a very beautiful, quiet neighbor who made the men act like fools and the women whisper with suspicion. Life in the compound continued as normal, at least on the surface, with jokes, laughter, and the ordinary bustle of daily life. Little did they know that this calm would not last for long. The sun set on Jeremy Heights that day as children chased each other in the yard and mothers called them in for dinner, the orange glow of dusk making the colorful houses look almost magical. Inside her small yellow-painted room, Lunara sat alone in the dim light, a small smile on her face. If anyone had been watching closely, they might have seen that her eyes weren't just calm, they were sad and far away, as if remembering a deep pain. But no one saw this side of Lunara yet. The stage was being set for something that would change Jeremy Heights forever. For now, everyone thought they were simply dealing with a case of men losing their common sense over a pretty face. They had no idea that something far beyond their understanding had quietly entered their lives with that beautiful stranger. Nobody in Jeremy Heights could guess what was coming, but the signs were already there, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves.
In the days following Lunara's arrival, the gossip mill at Jeremy Heights went into overdrive. The compound had never been so excited and shocked by a single person before. Every morning began with someone mentioning Lunara's name, and every night ended with a group of neighbors dissecting her every move. The women, especially, were determined to find out who this beautiful newcomer really was. After all, if one stranger could make grown men act like children, something must be off. One sunny afternoon, a few of the women gathered in Mama Shade's small living room to discuss the Lunara problem, as they half-jokingly called it. Mama Shade's house was painted a soft pink color and was filled with the comforting smell of herbs and spices from her cooking. She was the eldest woman in the compound and often acted like the community mother, always ready with advice or a scolding if needed. This day, her living room became like a secret meeting headquarters. Bisi was there, Kunle's wife, along with Mrs. Okoro, Ade's wife. Her name was Fumi, and young Amaka, who was newly married to a quiet man named Chidi. They shut the door firmly, though not without peeking out first to make sure no eavesdropping husbands were lurking around. Then they all sat down on wooden chairs and Mama Shade's threadbare sofa, fanning themselves slowly as the ceiling fan squeaked overhead. "We have to do something about that girl," Fumi started, her arms crossed. She was still annoyed with her husband Adi for abandoning her at church because of Lunara. "My husband's head is not correct again. Can you imagine leaving me stranded? For what? Because he saw that one passing by?" She clicked her tongue in disbelief. Bisi agreed vigorously. "Kunle has been acting like a lost puppy. Yesterday, I sent him to buy yam and palm oil from the market, and he came back with a bag of sweets and no yam at all. When I asked why, he said he forgot what I asked him to buy." Forgot? In all our 15 years, that man never forgets food items, especially yam, his favorite. But he saw Lunara near the junction on his way, and just like that, everything flew from his brain. Bisi tapped her forehead. "It's like she's using remote control to change our husbands' minds." Amaka, the youngest, spoke up timidly. "Maybe she doesn't know what she's doing. She seems so quiet and gentle." Amaka had always seen Lunara smile politely, and she admitted Lunara had been nothing but nice in their short interactions. What if we are wrong about her? Mama Shade cleared her throat. She had been listening quietly while the younger women vented. "My dears," she said in her calm, grandmotherly voice, "quiet water runs deep. It is not by noise that trouble comes. Sometimes the most dangerous poison is the one that has no smell." She adjusted her glasses and leaned in. "We must find out who this Lunara really is. Where is she from? Is she married? Single? What's her story?" "Yes, oh," Fumi exclaimed. "She just appeared from nowhere and took that back room. Even landlord Usman was smiling like a Christmas goat when he gave her the keys. I heard he didn't even ask many questions because he was busy grinning at her." The women laughed a little at that image. Old landlord Usman acting like a shy schoolboy. The landlord rarely came by, but apparently, when Lunara came to rent the place, even he wasn't immune to her charm. He offered her a good price and told the caretaker to take care of our new madam as if she were some VIP. Amaka bit her lip. "Maybe we should just talk to her, welcome her properly. Perhaps if we invite her and get to know her, we won't be so suspicious." The others exchanged glances. It was true, none of them had actually tried to befriend Lunara. They were too busy watching her from afar. Bisi shrugged. "It's worth a try. If she's innocent, maybe she will open up to us. And if not, Fumi interjected, we will find out the truth another way." They decided that the next evening, they would host a casual little welcome gathering for Lunara. Nothing big, just an excuse to chat. They planned to invite her to join them for a drink of soda and some fried puff-puff, sweet dough balls, under the mango tree, where the neighbors often relaxed. That evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky orange, the women set out their plan. Mama Sadi fried up a big batch of puff-puff, and Bisi brought out a few bottles of Fanta and Coke with ice. The men were mostly indoors or still out at work, which was good because the women wanted Lunara to themselves without the men acting like fools. Amaka went to Lunara's door and gently knocked. The door of the small yellow-painted room opened, and Lunara peeked out with her bright, curious eyes. "Good evening, Auntie," she said softly when she saw Amaka. Though Amaka was younger, Lunara always used respectful terms. Amaka smiled warmly, although her heart was beating fast from nerves. "Good evening, sister. We are all sitting outside. We wanted to invite you to join us, just to relax a bit and welcome you properly." Lunara looked a little surprised. She hesitated for a moment, glancing behind her as if considering something. But then she smiled and said, "Thank you, I'll come." Moments later, Lunara walked across the yard to the mango tree where the rest of the women waited. The orange glow of sunset made the compound look peaceful. The women had arranged their chairs in a loose circle. They greeted her warmly. "You're welcome, come and sit," said Mama Sade, gesturing to a chair they had placed next to her. Lunara sat down, smoothing her simple blue skirt. "Thank you, Ma," she said politely. Bisi offered her a cold bottle of Fanta and a paper plate with puff-puff. "I hope you like this. We made it for you," Bisi said, trying to sound cheerful. Lunara took a sip of the drink and a small bite of puff puff. "It's very nice, thank you," she said. Her smile was calm. Up close like this in the fading daylight, the women could see how truly beautiful she was. It almost took their breath away. Even some of the women had to admit in their hearts that Lunara's beauty was extraordinary. But they reminded themselves, focus. They were here to learn more about her. For a while, they made the usual small talk. Amaka asked, "So, Lunara, how are you finding our compound? I hope everyone has been treating you well." "Oh yes," Lunara nodded. "People here are very kind. I like it here." Her voice was just gentle as ever. Fumi leaned forward slightly and said, "If you don't mind me asking, where are you from? Did you grow up in Lagos?" This was the question they all really wanted answered. Lunara paused, looking at her bottle of Fanta as she rolled it between her palms. "I've lived in different places," she said vaguely. "Not too far from here. I moved around a lot." That wasn't a very clear answer. Mama Sade tried a different approach. "What about family? Do you have relatives in the city?" Lunara gave that small, polite smile again. "No, I'm alone. No family here." The women looked at each other. Alone? A young, beautiful woman like her living alone with no family around? It was unusual in our culture. Most people had some cousin or auntie or someone nearby. "You're not married?" Bisi asked directly, then felt a tiny bit bad for being so blunt. But she had to ask. Lunara shook her head. "No, I'm not married." A fine woman like you," Fumi blurted out before she could stop herself. "Sorry, I mean, you are still young, of course," she added, trying to cover her slip with a laugh. Lunara's expression flickered for a second, maybe a flash of sadness, but it was gone so quickly they weren't sure if they imagined it. "Maybe someday," was all Lunara said softly. There was a short silence. Mama Sade cleared her throat to break the awkward pause. "We are glad to have you with us," she said kindly. "Sometimes life in Lagos can be hard if you are on your own. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask us, your neighbors." Lunara bowed her head slightly in thanks. "Thank you so much. I appreciate it, ma." As the evening went on, they talked about lighter things. At least, the women tried to keep it light. They told Lunara funny stories about the compound. Bisi recounted the time a goat wandered into Mama Sade's kitchen and made off with a whole pot of stew, making everyone laugh. Amaka talked about the noisy rooster next door that acted like an alarm clock every morning at 5 a.m. The women relaxed as they chatted, finding themselves enjoying the conversation. Lunara listened with genuine interest, laughing softly at the right moments. She shared a couple of small stories too, like how she once got lost trying to find the market and a kind Okada motorcycle rider helped her get there. It was a simple story, but it showed she was just a normal person adapting to a new neighborhood. Gradually, the women began to think, perhaps they had misjudged Lunara. She seemed so normal and sweet after all. Maybe there was no wicked motive or secret. Maybe she truly was just a pretty girl starting fresh in a new place. As night fell, a few of the men drifted out to join the gathering under the mango tree, curious about what was happening. Of course, the moment the first man, it was Mr. Okoro, came out and saw Lunara sitting there, he nearly tripped over his own feet in surprise. Soon, more of the men appeared one by one, drawn like flies to a lantern. Chidi came out looking for his wife Amaka, but ended up standing awkwardly at the edge of the circle because Lunara was there. Ade had been out working late, but as he returned, he spotted the group and immediately went to fetch a chair, much to Fumi's eye rolling. Before long, what was meant to be a small women's welcome gathering turned into a larger hangout with most of the neighborhood present, all because the men couldn't resist joining when they heard Lunara's soft laughter from afar. The women watched in annoyance as their husbands and neighbors tried to subtly inch their chairs closer to Lunara, like metal pins drawn to a magnet. Kule even brought out a small portable radio and put on some cool high-life music, acting like it was a casual decision, though everyone knew he was trying to impress Lunara with his music selection. To the women's surprise though, Lunara didn't seem to flirt or encourage any of the men's antics. She remained as she was, calm, polite, occasionally smiling, but mostly quiet. If a man directed a question at her, she answered briefly and kindly, then went back to sipping her Fanta. In fact, after a while she excused herself saying,
Thank you for the lovely evening. I think I should go and rest now. It was about 9 p.m., but she stood up and gave an apologetic smile. Ah, already going? Kunle blurted out, clearly disappointed. He had barely had a chance to impress her with his jokes, which weren't that funny to begin with. Yes, I have an early morning tomorrow, Lunara lied politely, or maybe it was true, who knew? Thank you all. She gave a little wave and headed back to her room, disappearing inside.
As soon as her door was shut, an argument broke out in the compound yard. Fumi smacked Ade lightly on the arm. You! Why did you come out here? Were we not enough to welcome her? Must you men poke your noses into everything? Ade rubbed his arm, protesting. Ow! I only came to join the fun. Why are you angry? Did I do anything? I just sat here. Bisi glared at Kule, who was fiddling with his radio. And you, Kule? So you even put music? See all of them trying to charm her as if she's the one who cooked their meals. Kule frowned. What did I do? I was just being hospitable, playing music for our gathering. Is it a crime? Mama Sade shook her head at the husband and shooed them with her hand. Enough, all of you. Go to your houses. The meeting is over. Being the eldest, she could talk to them like children, and they respected her enough to obey, grumbling as they dispersed. After the men had sulked away and the chairs were being cleared, the women gathered the leftover puff-puff and drinks. They were quiet for a moment. Then Amaka spoke softly. She seems nice. Maybe we were overthinking. Fumi pressed her lips together. Maybe, but how do you explain all the things happening? Our men have been acting bewitched. Mama Sade thoughtfully added, True, but perhaps that's just men being men, easily swayed by beauty. It might not be her fault at all. They all murmured in agreement at that possibility. Perhaps Lunara herself was not intentionally doing anything. It could just be their foolish husband causing drama because they couldn't control their eyes. With that more comforting thought, everyone said goodnight and went to their houses. Yet, despite their words, a small seed of doubt remained in Mama Sade's mind. She didn't want to worry the younger ones, but something about Lunara still felt different. She was nice, yes, but there was something behind her eyes, Mama Sade thought, as she got ready for bed. The moment when Lunara had been asked about marriage, that flash of pain or sorrow, Mama Sade had caught it. There was a story there, something the girl wasn't telling. That night, Ajeromi Heights was peaceful. The noises of crickets filled the warm air. The colorful houses, illuminated by the faint light of kerosene lamps and the 1 or 2 working electric bulbs, whenever NEPA had graciously given electricity, looked calm and ordinary. Inside their rooms, the neighbors slowly drifted to sleep. Lunara sat on her bed in her one-room apartment, the faint moonlight through the window highlighting her profile. In her hand, she held a small old photograph, though no one was there to see this. It showed a younger Lunara looking joyful, standing next to another young woman who had the same bright eyes. Lunara touched the face in the photo gently, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Nalara," she whispered in the darkness, her voice full of longing and sorrow. Outside, an owl hooted, and a sudden breeze made the mango tree's leaves rustle, as if in response. Unaware of this, the compound slept on. They all believed the strange episode of men losing their senses might be ending. They thought by befriending Lunara, they had solved the mystery. Little did they know that the real mystery was only just beginning. In the coming days, events would take a turn that none of them expected. The laughter and gossip would soon be replaced by fear and confusion. For now, though, a calm, quiet night fell over Ajeromi Heights, and even the suspicious women slept a little easier after their meeting with the polite, charming Lunara. But the secrets of Lunara were waiting patiently in the shadows, soon to reveal themselves under much darker circumstances. For a short while after that friendly evening, Ajeromi Heights stayed peaceful and cheerful. The neighbors felt relieved. They believed that maybe all the drama had been nothing more than silly men acting foolish over a pretty face. Lunara kept to herself as usual, greeting everyone politely each day. The wives relaxed a bit, the husbands tried to behave. It seemed like life was returning to normal. But then, strange things started to happen. It began subtly at first. Kunle was the one who noticed it.
One hot afternoon, he was at the mechanic's workshop down the road to service his car. As he sat on a bench waiting for Ibrahim, the mechanic, to finish checking the engine, Kunle thought he saw a familiar figure out of the corner of his eye. Across the busy road, near a small shop, stood a woman that looked exactly like Lunara. She was wearing the same kind of simple dress Lunara often wore. Kunle blinked in surprise. What was Lunara doing there near the workshop in the middle of the day? He stood up to wave or call out, but a passing truck blocked his view for a second. When the truck passed, the woman was gone. Kunle scratched his head. Maybe he was mistaken. Perhaps it was someone else who looked like her. But a chill ran down his spine despite the heat of the sun. He felt uneasy, as if he had seen something he wasn't supposed to see. Later that day, he returned to the compound and casually asked, "Ah, Lunara, you went out this afternoon." Lunara was sweeping the front of her door at that moment. She looked up, seeming confused. "This afternoon? No, I was at home. I didn't go anywhere today." She smiled politely and continued her sweeping. Kunle's mouth went dry. If Lunara was home, then who or what did he see at the roadside? He decided not to mention it to his wife or anyone to avoid more drama. Maybe his eyes just played tricks on him under the bright sun. However, that night, Kunle had a dream. In the dream, he was walking through an empty street in the neighborhood. Everything was eerily quiet. No people, no cars, not even the sound of insects. He saw Lunara standing under a street light ahead, her back turned to him. He called out, "Lunara," he called out in the dream. She turned around very slowly and looked at him. But something was terribly wrong. Her face was in shadow and her eyes glowed a faint red in the darkness. She didn't speak, just stared at him with those burning, sad eyes. Kunle woke up with a start, sweat covering his forehead. It was just a nightmare, he told himself, just a nightmare. But he couldn't shake the feeling of dread it left. The next day, more unsettling events unfolded, this time with Ibrahim the mechanic himself. Ibrahim was a cheerful, hard-working young man, well-liked in the community. He often worked late fixing cars, and sometimes he'd only return to the compound in the late evening after closing his workshop. One night, Ibrahim was coming home around 10 p.m. The compound was mostly quiet, a few dim lights were on in windows, and the night was warm and still. As Ibrahim walked down the street towards Ajeromi Heights, he saw ahead of him a figure that looked exactly like Lunara. She was walking slowly, not too far ahead. Ibrahim felt curious and a bit nervous. Why would Lunara be out alone at this hour walking towards the old uncompleted building at the end of the road? That abandoned structure had been there for years, a place where neighborhood kids dared each other to enter during the day, but nobody went near it at night. Ibrahim kept a distance and followed quietly. Maybe she dropped something there, or is meeting someone, he thought. He didn't really believe any of the witchy gossip from the women, but it was unusual to see a quiet lady like Lunara wandering at night. Ibrahim saw Lunara walk into the compound of the uncompleted building. The building's concrete skeleton stood dark against the moonlight. Ibrahim's heart pounded. He hesitated at the entrance. "Lunara," he called softly. No answer. Gathering courage, he stepped inside. The interior was full of shadows and the smell of dust. A half-built staircase led to an open floor above, and the columns cast long, dark lines. Ibrahim thought he saw a movement on the floor above, like a flutter of clothing. He climbed the stairs carefully, the sound of his footsteps echoing. At the top, he looked around the empty room with broken walls. In a shaft of moonlight coming from a missing part of the roof, he saw Lunara standing there. She was facing the corner of the room, her back to him, just like in Kunle's dream. Ibrahim's mouth went dry. "Lunara?" he managed to whisper. Suddenly, Lunara, if it was really her, began to speak, but the voice that came out did not sound entirely like her. It was layered, as if two voices spoke at once. One was her soft tone, and the other was a deeper, echoing whisper that made Ibrahim's skin crawl. She said clearly, "All men lie, all men hit, all men kill." Ibrahim felt a cold wave of fear wash over him. He did not understand what she meant, but those words froze him in place. "Lunara," he said again, voice shaking. She turned around sharply, and in the moonlight, Ibrahim could finally see her face. He gasped. Lunara's usually beautiful face looked pale and distorted with anger, tears running down her cheeks. Her eyes looked different, filled with pain and fury.
Then as he blinked for just a split second, it was not Lunara's face he saw, but someone else's face over hers, another woman who looked similar to Lunara, but older, and with a haunted, bruised look. That unknown face was full of sorrow. Ibrahim stumbled back, terrified. He nearly tripped over a loose block as he backed away. When he looked up again, Lunara, or the apparition of her, was gone. The room was empty except for the moonlight and his own rapid breathing. Ibrahim did the only sensible thing. He ran. He ran out of the uncompleted building, down the street and straight towards home without looking back. By the time he reached Ajeromi Heights, he was trembling from head to toe and drenched in sweat. He burst into the compound yard where a few people were still sitting outside enjoying the night breeze. They all stared at him in concern. He looked like he had seen a ghost. In fact, he had. "What is it? Ibrahim, what happened?" one neighbor asked, standing up. Ibrahim opened his mouth but found he couldn't speak properly. His tongue felt heavy and his mind was spinning with confusion and fear. He tried to form words. I saw, he stammered. The neighbors gathered around, noticing how his eyes were wide with terror. "Calm down, breathe," Mama Sade said, coming forward. She had stepped out of her house upon hearing the commotion. She guided Ibrahim to sit on a bench. His chest heaved as he tried to catch his breath. After a moment, he finally muttered in a shaky whisper. She said, "All men lie, all men hit, all men kill." Everyone present felt a jolt of fear at those words. "Who said that?" Mama Sade asked urgently. "What are you talking about, Ibrahim?" But Ibrahim just stared blankly ahead, his face pale. He looked like he was in a trance. "All men lie, all men hit, all men kill," he repeated softly like a broken record. It was as though that phrase was stuck in his head, and it was the only thing he could say. Someone ran to get Pastor Elisha, the local church pastor who lived a few streets away. Pastor Elisha came quickly, still tying the drawstrings of his night pajamas as he arrived. He was a tall, slender man with a sincere face, known for his passionate preaching. He took one look at Ibrahim's state and suspected something spiritual was wrong. That night, right there in the yard of Ajeromi Heights, Pastor Elisha led a loud prayer session over Ibrahim. A few of the deeply religious neighbors joined in. They prayed, sang, clapped, and shouted for any evil presence to leave Ibrahim alone. The pastor sprinkled some holy water and even anointed Ibrahim's forehead with oil. After nearly an hour, Ibrahim seemed to calm down a bit. He stopped repeating the phrase, but he was exhausted and confused. The pastor advised that Ibrahim should not be left alone, so a couple of the men helped walk him into his room, and one neighbor stayed with him for the night. This incident left everyone shaken, but it was only the beginning. In the days that followed, more bizarre and frightening things happened to the men of Ajeromi Heights. One morning, Mr. Okoro, who had forgotten his daughter at school that time, woke up crying. Not just a little sniffle. This grown man woke up wailing like a baby and couldn't stop. His alarmed wife tried everything to console him, but he just kept crying and crying, as if he had lost something precious, though he himself didn't know why he was crying so hard. He stopped only after several hours, left weak and puzzled by the experience. Another man, Chidi, Amaka's husband, woke up with dark bruises all over his arms and legs, as if he had been beaten in his sleep. Amaka was terrified and asked him what happened, but Chidi had no idea. He had gone to bed feeling fine and woke up with painful marks. It made no sense until whispers spread in the compound that perhaps these were punishments for something. The question was, punishment for what? The strangest incident happened with Ade and Fumi. Ade had a temper sometimes, and one evening, he got into an argument with Fumi over something trivial. She cooked his soup with a little too much salt. Still stressed from the recent events, Ade lost his patience and raised his hand, about to slap his wife out of anger, something he had never actually done before. But in that moment, he snapped. Fumi flinched and closed her eyes, expecting the worst, but nothing happened. After a few seconds, she opened her eyes to see Ade standing there, his right hand still raised in the air. It was trembling, and his face had changed from anger to horror. He was struggling to bring his hand down, but it was like an invisible force held it in place. "Ade, what is this?" Fumi asked, both shocked and confused. Ade's mouth quivered. I can't move my hand," he whispered. His hand was literally frozen in mid-air, refusing to obey him. Fumi gasped and stepped away, frightened. Ade's eyes were wide with fear now. He used his other hand to try and pull down the raised hand, but it wouldn't budge. It was as stiff as if it had turned to wood. Fumi shouted for help. Neighbors came running into their living room to find Ade standing there with one arm up, tears running down his face in terror and shame. It took nearly 10 minutes before Ade's arm finally dropped back to his side, at which point he collapsed to the floor, sobbing and apologizing to Fumi over and over. These events were impossible to ignore. Fear crept into Ajeromi Heights like a thief in the night. The laughter that once echoed in the compound every evening disappeared. The gossip sessions under the mango tree now turned into prayer meetings or anxious discussions about what was happening to their men. The wives were now truly scared, and the husbands were humbled and frightened as well. The men no longer joked about Lunara or teased their wives about jealousy. In fact, most of the men tried to avoid Lunara entirely now, too afraid and confused to even look in her direction. What about Lunara during all this? Strangely, Lunara was seldom seen. She seemed to stay in her room most of the time, especially when trouble was happening. If anyone went to check on her, she was polite and said she was fine, or that she had been resting. She appeared at peace, as if nothing unusual was going on around her. This only made people more uneasy. Some neighbors whispered that she must be a witch or a spirit causing all this, but others said, no, she is just a coincidence. This is just a spiritual attack from elsewhere. But deep down, many began to connect the timing of Lunara's arrival with the start of all these strange occurrences. Desperate for a solution, Pastor Elisha became a regular visitor to the compound. He prayed day and night. He organized a fasting program for any volunteers, hoping to cast out whatever darkness hung over Ajeromi Heights. The pastor would walk through the compound, sprinkling holy water on doorposts and fervently singing hymns. A few of the neighbors joined him, clinging to rosaries or Bibles. Still, nothing seemed to change. The men continued to have nightmares or unexplained bruises. Some fell ill with fevers that no medicine could diagnose. They would shake and sweat and babble in their sleep about things chasing them. Kule confided quietly to the pastor one day, shame on his face, that he had seen Lunara's figure in a dream with red eyes. Mr. Okoro admitted that every time he closed his eyes to sleep, he felt like someone was standing in the corner of the room watching him. Chidi, whose body was bruised, said he dreamt he was being whipped by an unseen force while a woman's voice cried in the background. These confessions made Pastor Elisha more determined to break whatever curse was there.
He even attempted a direct approach. One afternoon, he decided to speak to Lunara herself. The pastor knocked on Lunara's door, intending to perhaps pray for her or just see if he sensed anything off about her. Lunara opened the door, greeted him politely as always. Pastor Elisha later told his wife that when he looked into Lunara's eyes, he felt a heaviness in his heart, as if looking at deep sorrow. He politely asked if he could pray for her, and Lunara had simply smiled and said, "If you want to, Pastor." He prayed briefly with her and she bowed her head quietly throughout. Nothing dramatic happened, no sudden outburst, no reaction. She thanked him and went back inside. The pastor left feeling more perplexed than ever. "She's just a gentle, sad young woman," he told Mama Sade afterwards. "If there is something in her, it's beyond my understanding, but I sense pain, deep pain." By now, fear had truly taken hold in the community. People moved around nervously and every unusual sound at night made them jump. The children were kept indoors more, the women hardly let their husbands out of sight. Not that the men wanted to wander off anymore. Conversations were hushed and full of worry. The once lively compound felt heavy with dread. It was clear to everyone that whatever was happening had to be confronted. They could no longer pretend it was just men being men or random bad luck. There was an unseen force at work, something that had come into their lives quietly and was now making a loud, terrible statement. Late one evening, after yet another day of strange sickness and fear, Mama Sade gathered a few neighbors in her home. Present were Pastor Elisha, Bisi and Kunle, Fumi and Ade, with Ade still rubbing his arm which felt sore after the freezing incident, Amaka and Chidi with visible bruises, and a couple of other elders from the compound. The small living room was crowded, the air thick with concern. A single lantern on the table cast long shadows on the wall. "We need to talk openly," Mama Sade began solemnly. "This started after Lunara came. We cannot accuse without proof, but we also cannot ignore the pattern. Something is wrong. Maybe she brought some spirit with her, or maybe she is in trouble and it's affecting us. Pastor Elisha nodded. I have been praying for guidance. Sometimes troubled souls attract other troubled souls. I suspect something happened to this girl or someone close to her. Evil thrives in silence and secrets. At the mention of something happening to someone close to her, Mama Sade's eyes widened slightly as if a puzzle piece clicked in her mind. A memory was stirring. She held up her hand. Wait, she said softly. Did you say someone close to her or something happened to her? She looked around the group. Everyone went quiet, watching her. They saw the change in her expression. Mama Sade's voice shook a little as she continued. There is a story, something I heard years ago back in my hometown of Orimae, a story of a woman, and her name, she paused, her heart beating fast. Could it be connected? It seemed too strange, but she had to speak what was on her mind. What story, Mama? Bisi urged gently. Anything could help us understand this. Mama Sade took a deep breath, her old eyes sad and serious. Years ago, in a town not far from here, there was a young woman who suffered greatly. Her name was Nalara. Those words hung in the air as the neighbors leaned in, listening intently. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance as if the skies themselves were listening to the coming revelation. Something told them that what Mama Sade was about to say would change everything they thought about Lunara and the nightmare they were living. Everyone in Mama Sade's living room leaned in as she began her tale. The only sounds were the distant rumble of thunder and the soft hiss of the lantern. A long time ago, when I was a young woman, Mama Sade said in a low, steady voice, I lived in a village called Orimaye for a few years. In that village, there was a family I knew well. There was a beautiful young woman named Nalara. She was kind, quiet, and respectful, just like our Lunara here. Nalara got married to a man from a neighboring village. In the beginning, everyone thought the man was a good, God-fearing person. Nalara moved to his home, and we only saw her occasionally after that. But then, whispers started coming back to our village. Mama Sade paused, her eyes reflecting painful memories. The listeners around her sat spellbound. Even the children who had been told to stay in their rooms were peeking from doorways, listening silently. We heard that Nalara's husband was not a good man at all, Mama Sade continued. Behind closed doors, he would beat her. At first, it was occasional, a slap here, a punch there, whenever he was angry or drunk. Nalara hid it from everyone. She would come home to visit her mother with a smile, covering her bruises with long sleeves and scarves. But a mother knows when her child is suffering. Nalara's mother grew worried. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the room for a split second. Pastor Elisha whispered a quick prayer under his breath, and Mama Sade went on. Things got worse. The man became more and more violent. He would lock her indoors for days, not letting her see anyone. People in that compound would hear her crying and screaming sometimes, but they did nothing. In those days, many would say, it's husband and wife matter, don't interfere. So neighbors kept quiet, and other men just shook their heads but didn't step in. One night, one terrible night, her husband's anger went too far. He beat Nalara so badly that her body could not take it anymore. By the time he realized what he had done, she was lying still on the floor. A collective gasp came from the listeners. Amaka put her hand over her mouth. Tears welled in Bisi's eyes. Fumi gripped Ade's hand tightly, and Ade hung his head. The room felt heavy with sorrow. Pastor Elisha made the sign of cross. May her soul rest, he said softly. Mama Sade sighed deeply. Nalara died that night, she said. She died at the hands of the man who promised to love her. And do you know what happened after? Mama Sade's voice grew bitter. The man panicked, but he had connections and he was clever. The story we heard is that he managed to hush it up. Nalara's death was quietly covered as an illness. They buried her quickly in the village without any noise. Her family was devastated, but they were poor and not powerful. The husband faced no real justice, perhaps some minor questioning by elders, but ultimately, he went on with his life. People forgot Nalara's suffering as if it were nothing. Other men in the village and even our village clucked their tongues when they heard, but soon they continued with their own lives, treating their own wives however they pleased, as if nothing had changed. Anger crept into Mama Sade's tone as she spoke the next words. Her story was buried faster than her body, as if her pain did not matter. I remember feeling so angry and helpless about it. But as a young woman, what could I do? I prayed for her soul, and then
Life went on. Everyone moved on. A heavy silence followed. Even the air felt tense. The storm outside sent rain pattering on the roof, a soft accompaniment to the harsh story.
Kunle broke the silence, his voice shaky. But Mama Sade, what does that have to do with Lunara? It's a tragic story, but... Mama Sade looked at him with a mix of fear and certainty in her eyes. Nalara, Lunara, she said slowly. Don't you hear it? The similarity. It is almost the same name, just twisted a little. She looked around at all of them. What if Lunara is not an ordinary person? What if she is connected to Nalara? A chill went through the room at her words. One of the elders, Mr. Bello, cleared his throat. Mama Sade, are you suggesting what I think you are? He asked, carefully. Mama Sade nodded. I know it sounds unbelievable, but the way our men have been losing their senses over her, then these punishments, it is as if someone or something is teaching men a lesson, making them feel what it is like to be powerless and afraid. When Ibrahim spoke those words, all men lie, all men hit, all men kill, it struck my heart. Those are words of deep bitterness, like someone who suffered and saw the worst of men. Pastor Elisha frowned, thinking hard. You think Lunara might be Nalara's spirit? He voiced it quietly, almost afraid to say it loud. A clap of thunder shook the windows as if in response, causing a couple of people to jump. The lantern flickered. Bisi held her breath. It sounded too fantastical, like a ghost story to scare children. Yet every strange thing that had happened began after Lunara arrived. It would explain a lot, Fumi said softly. She looked at her husband, Ade, remembering how his hand froze. It's like someone is punishing the men for things they have done or might do. But wait, Chidi spoke up gently, still holding his bruised arm with Amaka's help. None of us beat our wives here. We are not like that man in the story. Amaka gave him a tiny apologetic look because truthfully, some of the men in the compound had not been perfect husbands either. Maybe not as monstrous as Nalara's husband, but some had raised a hand before or at least threatened to, and many had certainly not treated their wives with proper respect until fear changed them recently. Pastor Elisha, still deep in thought, said, sometimes a spirit's anger does not discriminate. If it believes all men are the same, it might punish even those who have not done great wrong, just to make them understand the pain. He turned to Mama Sade. In that story, Mama, you said other men went on as if nothing happened, even laughing while their own wives suffered. Perhaps this spirit, if it is Nalara's spirit, is angry at not just her husband, but all men who don't stand up against such violence. Ade swallowed hard and said in a low voice, we did laugh when our wives complained about Lunara. We dismissed their fears. We said they were jealous and we continued behaving foolishly. Maybe we were wrong. His eyes were wet and Fumi squeezed her hand. Indeed, the men of Ajeromi Heights had been arrogant and dismissive of the feelings of their wives, even if they hadn't physically hurt them, at least not yet in Ade's almost case. Kunle, the loud braggart, looked utterly humbled now. I boasted no woman can control me, he said bitterly. Now see my life. The first day I greeted Lunara, I was running around like a headless chicken. If she's a spirit, she certainly made me eat my words. The more they discussed, the more convinced they became that Lunara was not just an innocent tenant. All the signs pointed to something supernatural. Fear mingled with a strange understanding. If Lunara was indeed Nalara or some manifestation of her, what did she want? To punish men indefinitely? To kill them? Or something else? Pastor Elisha cleared his throat. If this truly is a spirit of a wronged woman, perhaps what it wants is justice, or rather, acknowledgement. In the Bible even, sometimes the souls of the wronged cry out for justice. He turned to the others. We might have to confront her, or rather, confront it. Bisi flinched at that idea. Confront a ghost? How do we even do that? She's living in the back room like a normal person. The thought of Lunara as a ghost was giving her chills, remembering all her polite smiles. Mama Sade answered, we must speak with her. Ask her what she wants. If she is truly Nalara's spirit, perhaps she needs something to find peace. Amaka's voice trembled. What if she wants to hurt the men more? What if she wants revenge to the end? A silence fell, as that was a very real possibility. Pastor Elisha shook his head slowly. I have a feeling, if revenge was all she wanted, things could be much worse already.
Perhaps there is hope since none of the men have actually died or been permanently harmed. They have been scared, yes, but maybe this is a warning, not the final judgment. It was a frightening plan, but they agreed they had to try to speak to Nalara. The question was how and who. Kunle found himself volunteering before he could think it through. I will talk to her, he said firmly, though his insides were quivering with fear. I was the one who bragged the most. If she's going to be angry at anyone, it's me. And I feel I need to apologize, even if she's not a ghost. I have been disrespectful to my wife and to her. Bisi looked at her husband in surprise and then nodded, holding his hand. She saw the guilt and determination in his face. Pastor Elisha put a hand on Kunle's shoulder. I admire your courage. We will back you up with prayers. But perhaps it's best if it's just you and maybe one other person, so she doesn't feel cornered. Too many of us and it might turn into a mob confrontation. They considered who else? Ibrahim might have been a choice since he experienced a direct encounter, but he was still shaking and having trouble talking about it. Ade was willing, but Fumi squeezed his hand in a clear no. He had just nearly done something awful to her. He was in no moral position to confront a spirit of a battered woman. Chidi was injured and somewhat neutral, but he looked terrified of the idea. Finally, Pastor Elisha said, I'll go with Kunle. As a pastor, he felt it his duty to face such things. Besides, he reasoned, perhaps his presence would calm the situation or offer some spiritual protection. It was decided they would approach Nalara the next day. It was already late at night and the storm was raging outside. The plan was for Kunle and Pastor Elisha to speak to Nalara privately, ask her who she really was, and try to appease or help her. Everyone dispersed to their homes with heavy hearts, praying silently for safety and a resolution. However, Nalara had other plans. That very night, as the rain poured and the thunder rolled, something happened. Kunle lay in bed wide awake, going over what he would say to Nalara. Bisi was asleep beside him, exhausted by the emotional evening. Around midnight, the lights flickered as the power, which had briefly come back, went out again. NEPA took light at the worst times as usual. The room was cast in darkness except for occasional flashes of lightning. Kunle's eyes were open, staring at the ceiling when he felt it, a presence in the room. He sat up slowly, heart pounding. A figure stood at the foot of the bed. Lightning flashed and he saw her clearly for a second. Nalara. She was standing inside his bedroom, clothes dry despite coming through the storm, her eyes shining in the dark. Kunle could not tell if she was real or an apparition. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. His tongue felt heavy with fear. Lunara raised a hand slowly, a calm gesture telling him not to be afraid. Bisi remained asleep, as if in a deep, unnatural slumber. The sounds of the rain seemed distant now. In a low voice that echoed in the silence, Lunara finally spoke to Kunle. Come, she said. Come to the place where it ended. Kunle knew somehow what she meant. The uncompleted building at the end of the road. The same place Ibrahim had followed her ghostly figure. His blood ran cold, but he felt almost hypnotized. Lunara, or Nalara's spirit, turned and walked out of the bedroom door, though it never opened. She vanished into the night, leaving only the soft sound of rain. Kunle found that he could move again, and he jumped out of bed, throwing on his shirt and slippers. He was shaking, but he was determined. If this was Nalara's spirit calling him, he would go. He scribbled a quick note for Bisi in case she woke up and found him gone. Went to talk to Lunara. Stay inside. Love you. He wasn't sure she'd even understand what he meant, but he prayed he would return to explain. Armed with only a flashlight in the stormy night, Kunle stepped out of his house. The compound was dark and silent, everyone taking shelter from the downpour. The lantern in Mama Sade's house was out. Pastor Elisha's house was dark too. Perhaps he was praying by candlelight or asleep. Kunle felt alone but resolute. He clutched a small Bible in one hand and his flashlight in the other and walked out of Ajeromi Heights, heading to that deserted, uncompleted building down the street. The rain soaked him to the bone in seconds, but he didn't care. Lightning and thunder guided his path as he arrived at the old structure. The metal gate hung open, creaking in the wind. Kunle's flashlight flickered, but he kept it pointed forward. Lunara, he called out, voice barely audible over the storm. He stepped inside,
water dripping around him from the broken roof. There, illuminated by a flash of lightning, he saw her, Lunara, standing in the same spot Ibrahim had described, on the floor above the half-built stairs. She looked completely dry and untouched by the weather, her white dress flowing gently though there was no breeze inside. Kunle swallowed hard and climbed the stairs towards her, every step feeling like it took an eternity. His heart hammered in his chest, but he kept moving. This was it. The confrontation they intended to have tomorrow was happening now. Finally, he reached the top. Lunara turned to face him. Her face was calm but unsmiling, those eyes still shining strangely in the dark. Kunle noticed again how she looked so much like the description of Nalara in Mama Sade's story. Young, beautiful, but with an air of sorrow. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the rain drumming on the concrete and the distant rumble of thunder. Kunle mustered up courage and broke the silence. Nalara, he said uncertainly, using the name from Mama Sade's story. At that, Lunara's sad eyes seemed to brighten with tears. She nodded slowly, and then in a voice both gentle and filled with years of pain, she began to speak the truth that everyone had been desperate to know. In the cold, half-built room, Kunle stood face to face with the ghost of Nalara. Though she looked like Lunara, he now understood that this was indeed someone who had died with deep pain in her heart. His hands trembled, and the flashlight slipped from his fingers, clattering to the ground and leaving them lit only by intermittent lightning flashes. Kunle's voice was barely a whisper. You are Nalara, aren't you? Lunara, or Nalara's spirit inside Lunara's form, gave a slow nod. Her expression was sorrowful yet firm. When she spoke, her voice echoed, gentle but filled with emotion. Yes, I am Nalara, she said, or what is left of her in this world. Kunle felt a lump in his throat. He had never been a particularly sensitive or spiritual man, but now he was confronted with something beyond life and death, and it humbled him utterly. He sank to his knees on the wet concrete floor without even thinking, tears mixing with the rainwater around him. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, he blurted out, not even entirely sure what he was apologizing for first. Maybe for doubting her, maybe for all the hurt she endured, maybe for the way he and other men had behaved. Nalara's ghost watched him, and for a moment her hardened gaze softened just a little. She stepped closer, her bare feet not making a sound. Do you know why I came here? She asked. Kunle shook his head slowly, still on his knees. He dared to look up at her. In a flash of lightning, he saw tears glistening on her cheeks too. I did not come for love. I did not come for money or for any ordinary life. She looked away, eyes distant as if recalling a terrible memory. I came because I suffered and no one answered my cries. I came because I watched men laugh while women like me suffered in silence. I came because when I died, the world moved on as if I was nothing, as if all the pain was just another story to forget. Her voice trembled with long-held grief and anger. Kunle felt hot tears roll down his face. The weight of her words pressed on his heart like a stone. He thought of how he would sometimes dismiss his own wife's complaints, how he and his friends laughed at jokes about women or ignored it when a neighbor quarreled harshly with his wife, how they had all laughed and called their wives jealous instead of listening to their concerns about Lunara. Shame filled him. We were wrong, he choked out. We have been so wrong. Nalara's eyes flashed. She continued, her tone growing firm and echoing slightly in the empty space. My mission was simple, to make men feel fear, to make them feel loss, to make them remember what pain is, to remind the world that violence and silence have consequences, even beyond the grave. As she spoke, Kunle felt a chill. He understood now the nightmares, the bruises, the unexplained terror that he and the other men had experienced. She had been teaching them a lesson, forcing them to feel a fraction of what she felt. Nalara stepped even closer until she stood directly in front of Kunle. Gently, she placed her hand on his head. Her touch was icy cold but strangely soothing. You, Kunle, boasted that no woman could control you. It was men like you, proud, dismissive, who stood by while women suffered.
I wanted to open your eyes. Kunle nodded, tears dropping on the floor. You have. Oh, you have. I see it now, everything. I'm sorry for what happened to you. No one should go through that. And I'm sorry for not valuing the women in my life enough. Please, please forgive me. He sobbed openly, thinking of his wife Bisi and how poorly he'd behaved at times, and thinking of Nalara's suffering and how no one saved her. For a moment, there was silence except for the storm. Kunle closed his eyes, still kneeling, and waited. He wasn't sure if she would strike him down or forgive him or vanish. His heart pounded. Then he felt a cold fingertip under his chin, tilting his face up. Nalara's form knelt down slightly so she could look him in the eye. When he opened his eyes, he saw not anger now, but sadness, profound sadness. Kunle, she said gently, almost like a sigh. I have been so angry. I wanted to bring destruction to all who reminded me of the men who hurt me. I wanted to make every man I met pay for what was done to me. She paused, a tear falling from her eye onto Kunle's cheek. It was strangely warm. But something unexpected happened here. Kunle sniffed, listening, hope and fear swirling inside him. Nalara continued, some of you changed. You felt fear, but instead of letting it turn to hate, you chose remorse. You chose to change yourselves. As she said this, images seemed to flicker around them, as if the ghost was showing Kunle what she had seen in the compound. He saw a glimpse of Ade crying and apologizing to Fumi the night his hand was frozen, promising never to raise a hand again. He saw Mr. Okoro hugging his little daughter tightly, sobbing that he was sorry for neglecting her and his wife. He saw Chidi wince in pain from his mysterious bruises, but then gently hold Amaka's hand and tell her he will always protect her and never let harm come to her. And beyond that, he saw something he didn't know had happened. One of their neighbors, a quiet man named Emeka, who often kept to himself, was shown confessing in front of elders and community members. Emeka admitted that he had been beating his wife in secret for years whenever he got drunk. With tears, Emeka begged for help to change and for forgiveness, and he voluntarily went to stay with relatives while village elders decided how to handle his case and keep his wife safe. This vision shocked Kunle. He hadn't realized that there was an actual wife beater among them. The ghost had uncovered it. Then another image, a man from 2 compounds away, hastily loading a car with bags and leaving in the dead of night. Kunle recognized him loosely. He was known as Alhaji Musa, someone who had a reputation for being rough with women. It seemed that after hearing about bizarre happenings at Jeremy Heights, that man grew scared that he might be next and fled the area, possibly out of guilt or fear that the vengeful spirit would find him. Kunle watched these scenes in awe. Nalara's ghostly presence had created a ripple effect beyond just their compound, it seemed. It forced hidden abuse into light and scared at least one abusive man into running away altogether. Nalara spoke again, her voice quieter now. I wanted to bring punishment and destruction, but I found repentance and change instead. And that cooled the fire of my anger. Kunle felt a wave of relief, seeing that her eyes were no longer burning with that eerie light. They looked more like how Lunara's eyes had been when she first arrived. Calm, deep, and infinitely sad. What will you do now? He dared to ask. Nalara stood up slowly, and Kunle did too, though his legs were shaky. She looked around the empty, dark structure. My time here is almost over, she whispered. I have done what I came to do. She walked towards a gap in the wall where a window would have been. The rain had eased to a gentle drizzle, and the storm clouds were beginning to part, revealing a few stars in the night sky. Nalara looked up at the sky as if searching for something.
Kunle stepped forward. He felt a deep sympathy and sorrow for her. Nalara, he said softly, I wish things had been different for you. We will never forget you, I promise. I will tell everyone your story, and I will do everything I can to make sure no woman around me goes through what you did. She turned to him and gave a small, genuine smile, the first true smile he had seen on Lunara's face since she arrived. It was filled with gratitude and a hint of peace. Thank you,
she said quietly. Remember what you have seen. Remember what you have learned. Kunle nodded vigorously. I will. We all will. Nodding in return, Nalara closed her eyes. For a moment, her form glowed faintly, a soft light outlining her. Kunle blinked as the figure seemed to waver. The ghostly image of another woman, the one he assumed was the real Nalara, overlapped with Lunara's form. Then a breeze that did not belong to the night gently blew through the room, and with that, the glowing figure faded away. Goodbye, Nalara, Kunle whispered, realizing she was gone. A profound silence followed, broken only by the last dripping of rainwater from the ceilings. After catching his breath and regaining his composure, Kunle picked up his flashlight. Though shaken, he felt strangely lighter, as if a great burden had been lifted from the entire place. He hurried back to the compound, eager to tell the others what happened. By dawn, the news had spread through Ajeromi Heights like Hamatan wildfire. Lunara was gone. Her room at the back was found empty, the door wide open. Inside, everything was neat and in place, except no sign of Lunara herself. It was as if she had simply walked out and disappeared with the night rain. Only Mama Sade found one thing left on Lunara's small cable, a single faded photograph. It showed two young women looking like sisters. One of them was clearly a younger Nalara. Mama Sade recognized her from years ago. The other woman looked similar, perhaps a relative. They were smiling in the photo, a snapshot of happiness from long ago. Mama Sade held the photo to her chest and silently understood. Nalara had left behind a piece of her true self, perhaps as proof of who she was, or as a final goodbye. There was both sadness and hope in the air that morning. The strange curse, or whatever it was, had lifted. None of the men felt the unexplained fear or pain anymore. Ibrahim regained his full speech and couldn't stop thanking God. Mr. Okoro had no more nightmares and played cheerfully with his daughter that morning like nothing else mattered. Chidi's bruises faded, and he helped Amaka cook breakfast, surprising her with his gentleness and affection. Kunle, exhausted but excited, gathered as many neighbors as possible in the yard. Under the early morning sun, with dewy grass and the fresh smell of rain in the air, Kunle recounted everything that had happened in the uncompleted building. He told Nalara's words, her mission, and her decision to leave after seeing that some men could change. He admitted his own faults openly and urged the other men to do the same. Many of the husbands publicly apologized to their wives right there and then for any time they caused them pain or dismissed their fears. It turned into a deeply emotional gathering. Some tears were shed, but they were healing tears. Even Pastor Elisha, who stood in the circle with his Bible, had tears in his eyes as he led a short prayer of forgiveness and new beginnings. They prayed for Nalara's soul to find rest and for their community to be better, to stand against domestic violence and not take lightly any suffering in silence. In the midst of that gathering, Mama Sade raised the photograph of Nalara and her sister. "Let us never forget," she said solemnly. "This is the woman who came to warn us. She suffered, but she did not let it be for nothing." Everyone agreed. As the day progressed, life slowly began to settle. People still whispered in amazement, finding it hard to believe they had lived with a ghost in their midst. The story spread beyond Ajeromi Heights. Neighbors told neighbors, and soon people in the next street were talking about how a ghost of a woman taught a lesson to abusive men. It became half cautionary tale, half local legend. Yet, the story wasn't quite over. One final night was to bring true closure to those who had been most affected, the women of Ajeromi Heights. Although Lunara, Nalara's spirit, had seemingly vanished with the storm, she had one last act to perform. The men might have learnt their lesson, but the women also needed to hear something important. Late that night, after the day of confessions and apologies, when the compound was dark and quiet, a few of the women found themselves drawn outside without really knowing why. Mama Sade, BC, Fumi, Amaka, and a couple of other wives stepped out of their houses almost in a trance. The night was clear now, the moon shining brightly and stars scattered across the sky. They gathered in the yard near the mango tree, the same spot where they had welcomed Lunara nights ago. And then she was there. Lunara appeared under the moonlight, looking as serene and beautiful as the first day they saw her. But now there was a gentle glow about her. The women did not feel afraid. Instead, they felt a calm awe. They instinctively formed a semicircle around her, not too close, just gazing. Nalara's spirit, in Lunara's form, looked at each of the women with kindness and a touch of sorrow. These were the women who first sensed something was off, who had been protective and then scared, and who now stood as witnesses to the change that had come. She had one final message for them. In that silent courtyard, bathed in moonlight, Lunara's voice carried softly, with a power that etched every word into their souls. "Teach your daughters not to endure violence," she said, her eyes on Mama Sade and then on the younger ones like Amaka and Fumi. Each woman felt the weight of those words, knowing that too often girls are raised to tolerate too much, to keep quiet, to keep a home. Then Lunara turned her gaze to Bisi and some of the mothers who had sons. "Teach your sons not to become monsters," she said. The words were simple, but they struck deep. Monsters are not born, they are made, often by excusing bad behavior in boys and men, by not teaching them empathy and respect. Tears rolled down more than one cheek as the women absorbed this message. They all nodded solemnly. They would remember. They would make sure Nalara's death and her restless return had meaning for future generations. Having delivered her final words, Lunara smiled, a radiant, relieved smile. The wind picked up gently, rustling the leaves of the mango tree. The women felt a sense of peace wash over them. In the blink of an eye, Lunara was gone. The spot where she stood was empty under the moonlight. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. It was Mama Sade who finally whispered, "Thank you, Nalara." The others echoed softly, "Thank you." The night seemed to sigh with a breeze, as if in response. The women returned to their beds, quietly and thoughtfully, their hearts full. They did not wake their husbands. For once, this was a moment just for the women to hold and carry forward. In the morning, they would tell the men and the children about this final encounter and the important lesson given to them. But for now, in the gentle darkness, they allowed themselves to feel pride and sorrow and hope all at once. Pride that a wronged woman had found some justice, sorrow for the pain she endured, and hope that things would be different in their community from now on. Ajeromi Heights had been forever changed by Lunara's visit, and as the ghost had wished, they would always remember. The next morning, the women of Ajeromi Heights shared the final message from Lunara with their families and neighbors. As the sun rose warm and golden over the compound, there was a quiet, reverent mood among the residents. They gathered once again, this time not out of fear or sorrow, but to reflect on everything that had happened. Mama Sade, with the old photograph of Nalara still in her hand, spoke to everyone, especially the young ones and the men who hadn't been present the previous night. "Last night," she explained, "the spirit of Nalara spoke to us women. She told us to teach our daughters not to endure violence and to teach our sons not to become monsters." The crowd listened intently. Many people nodded in agreement. These words struck a chord. Everyone could see their simple but powerful truth. A couple of teenage boys in the compound shuffled uncomfortably, perhaps embarrassed as all eyes briefly turned to them. Pastor Elisha gently patted one boy's shoulder and said, "It means we must all raise our children to know right from wrong, to never think it's okay to hurt those weaker than them, and never to accept abuse as normal." In the days and weeks that followed, Ajeromi Heights gradually returned to its routine, but it was clear that it was not the same compound as before. There was a new atmosphere of understanding and mutual respect. The men, having faced fear and possibly the supernatural, were gentler and more attentive to their wives and families. The women, empowered by what they had witnessed, were more confident in speaking out and supporting each other.
Kunle, who used to boast loudly, became a notably quieter and more humble man. He went out of his way to show love to Bisi, helping with chores, spending time listening to her day, and never again dismissing her feelings. One evening, some weeks later, a younger man from a nearby compound was visiting and made a joke about controlling women. In the past, Kunle might have laughed along, but this time, Kunle fixed the young man with a stern look and said, "My brother, respect your wife and every woman. You don't want to learn the hard way." Others who heard him knew exactly what he meant, and the joke died on the young man's lips. Ade and Fumi grew closer after their ordeal. Ade, ashamed that he had nearly struck his wife, treated her like a queen henceforth, and Fumi forgave him, seeing the genuine change in his heart. Chidi and Amaka likewise deepened their bond, and Chidi became an advocate among his friends for treating wives well. Mr. Okoro was never again absent or forgetful about his family duties. He made it a habit to double-check that he remembered everything and everyone. The story of Lunara spread through the neighborhood and beyond. People in other compounds started recounting the chilling yet poignant tale in the evenings. It became something of a local legend, the beautiful ghost who came to teach a lesson. Some details grew exaggerated in retellings, as usually happens. Some said she was 7 feet tall, some claimed she had the strength of 10 men, but the core message remained intact. Elders in the community began to use the story as a warning. For instance, if they heard of a man raising his hand against his wife, an elder might say, "When a man lifts his hand in anger, he should remember Lunara." That phrase took root. It served as a potent reminder that one never knows what unseen forces might hold a person accountable for cruelty. As one elder elaborated to a group of wide-eyed young men, some ghosts don't come to haunt houses, they come to haunt bad behavior. And hearing that, even the most stubborn youths would lower their heads in respect and thought. Children too learned the tale. On bright afternoons, you could see a few kids role-playing in the yard. One would pretend to be a ghost lady scaring the naughty men, making the others scream and then laugh. Parents didn't discourage it too much, because in their play, the children were also learning empathy. Little girls learned that suffering in silence was not the way, and little boys learned that hurting others could bring serious consequences. One Saturday, the community decided to honor Lalara's memory in a formal way. Pastor Elisha and the compound residents organized a small gathering and invited people from nearby streets. They planted a young tree, a sturdy almond tree sapling, in a corner of the compound and placed a small painted sign beside it. The sign read, "In memory of Lalara, Lunara, may we never forget to stand against violence." It wasn't an official grave, but it was a living tribute. As the tree grew, it would bloom and provide shade, a symbol of how something good can grow from acknowledging past wrongs. At the planting ceremony, Mama Sadis spoke to the crowd. She was not used to speaking in front of so many, but her voice was clear. "We plant this tree to remind us of the lesson we learned," she said. "Not just because of fear, but because it is right. We all saw how the soul of that poor woman bore a scar that even death couldn't erase until justice was done. Let us remember to never remain silent in the face of such violence and to always stand up against it." Her words echoed the very moral that Lunara's story embodied. Those gathered murmured in agreement. Many had tears in their eyes, thinking of those they knew who suffered in silence and vowing to do better by them. Life went on in Ajeromi Heights, but the unity and watchfulness grew. Neighbors looked out for one another more sincerely. If ever a quarrel started to get too heated, others would gently intervene early, reminding the couple of peace and understanding. The women formed something of an informal support group. They promised that if any of them ever felt unsafe, they would speak up and the rest would rally around her. It was a profound change from the days when people might have said, "It's not our business." As for Lunara, some nights when the wind was very still and the moon particularly bright, a few swore they saw a figure in white walking past the compound gate or a brief shadow near the old uncompleted building. Perhaps it was just imagination or tricks of the light, but whenever a neighbor thought they saw her, they simply smiled, unafraid. They would whisper, "Thank you, Nalara, we remember," and head home to their loved ones. The colorful houses of Ajeromi Heights stood peaceful and lively once again. Children's laughter returned, and the friendly gossip under the mango tree resumed with kinder tones. The fear was gone, replaced with wisdom and vigilance.
And indeed, the elder saying lived on. When a man even thinks of raising his hand in anger, he should remember Lunara. It became an unwritten law among them. The memory of that gentle, beautiful ghost would forever guard the compound against returning to its old ways. In the end, the story of Lunara taught everyone a powerful lesson that would not be forgotten. Ajeromi Heights would always remember Lunara, the ghost who came not to haunt their homes, but to heal their hearts and change their ways. Violence leaves scars even beyond death, and silence is sometimes the weapon that creates monsters. Thank you for watching this story on Afro Tales TV. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up, leave us a comment, and share with friends and family. We have more beautiful stories coming your way, so subscribe and stay tuned. See you in the next one.